Shalom Aleichem, Eitan, how are you going?
I'm good. How are you, Rabbi Mirvis?
I am grand, Baruch Hashem, and I am so pleased that you have agreed to join me for this conversation so that together we can launch Libre Yavneh College's policy for the well-being of LGBTI plus students.
Very exciting.
Now, I can't think of anyone better than you to have this conversation with as we launch this guide, but for the benefit of those who may not know you, please tell us a bit about what you've done since school, since we last knew Eitan, the popular student in the musicals.
So I was a student at Yavneh, and right before I had known I was gay from year 9, and right before I graduated and I was looking forward to my year in Israel, I was going on Shnat with Hineni. I knew that I didn't want to spend that time kind of in the closet. So I went about kind of telling my friends and, I'd already told my parents, but the rest of my family. And then kind of since I've graduated, I've been fully out as gay.
So when did you start telling your friends?
So it was probably the week before graduation. I would take them one-on-one on little drives. Mm-hmm. And then, I kind of did all my close friends. And then I remember saying to my last friend, look, you're the last person I'm telling from now on. I'm not going to say, oh, I have a crush on that girl. I'm going to use the word boy. I'm going to use the word he. I'm not going to hide this from anyone anymore. And then, since then I've gone on Shnat, I've come home. I've been a Hineni Madrich. I study occupational therapy now, and I have come back to Yavneh to work a little bit.
And you are a member of the Libre Yavneh College Jewish Studies staff at the moment.
Yes.
Performing which role?
I'm part of the Jewish Studies curriculum support team, which is super fun and a really, really important initiative that Yavneh is running right now.
But unfortunately, I understand your university studies are stealing you from us a bit too much this term.
Bit by bit. I'm fighting back against them. I don't get to be a Jewish studies teacher as much as I would love, but my dad says studying is important too, so I've got to listen to him.
It's very, very important. It's an investment in you and an investment in the Jewish community. So you should do that as well. And the focus of the document, which we're now launching, is very much on the experience of the student in school. And you are uniquely qualified to talk to us about this. What was your experience as a gay student inside our school?
Yeah. I think, when I think back to my Yavneh experience, I feel really lucky to have gone to Yavneh for the friends I made there. And, I think I got a lot of lifelong teachers, not just teachers that kind of left me at year 12 at Yavneh. And I'm really grateful for that. And, even though I was in the closet throughout my whole Yavneh experience, I never heard, homophobic slurs that made me feel isolated as a gay person. I never felt, even though I wasn't out, I never felt mistreated. But there was a resounding, it felt like if I would have come out during school, there would have been a stigma around me. And, ultimately that's why me and my family decided that it wasn't appropriate that while I was a student at Yavneh, that I would come out. But, beyond that, I didn't feel uncomfortable. I felt super comfortable in my own skin, and besides for my sexuality, able to explore my identity to the fullest within my Yavneh days.
Well, that's actually really positive to hear, because if I think back to my high school experiences, the playground was a really brutal place, and the language in the common room was more or less the language from the football stands, which is terribly homophobic. And no one ever meant to be harmful or cause hurt. But if you're saying that you came through your entire school experience having never been treated or mistreated or insulted in that way, I'm proud of our school that was your Yavneh experience. Now, we clearly want all of our members of staff, in addition to our students, to show absolute sensitivity and care with their words at all times. But speaking to me now as a member of staff in the school, what should I have in mind when I'm teaching a class in Yavneh? What is it that I should be sensitive towards? What are the perhaps triggers or areas where I may not even know that I'm causing somebody some discomfort? What is it that we should be aware of for the students in our school who are LGBTI plus?
I think that it's really important to be clear on the language we use around it. You know, even if you're in a class where you're teaching to, oh, I'm sure everyone here is straight or whatever, like it's not likely that that's true. It's likely that in our classrooms there are, like you said, LGBT students, and therefore we should be using language that's careful and considered, and you know, just things like knowing the difference between gender and sexuality, and you know, I think really basic things. Not that we have to be stressed around having the right language. I think it's important.
That's clearly there's a whole appendix attached to this document, and part of our staff training today is going to be talking about appropriate language. And that's something which I learned from you, something which you've told me that I could advise other rabbis is, at the very least, understand the language. So it's not like when somebody comes to have this conversation with you, they're speaking in a foreign language. Know what LGBTQI stands for, what each thing is, what, like you said, the difference between sex and gender. And that's really important advice, because you're not asking anybody to in any way change their views about anything. It's simply about understanding the language and understanding what somebody's telling you when they're coming to speak to you.
Yeah, exactly. I really agree with that. And beyond that, I think, you know, like, to me, it's important that staff will know kind of what's bumping around in an LGBT student's head. And I'll tell you what those two things were for me. But one of them that was really important is my family. And like I have 3 younger brothers who were all at school while I was at school. And, you know, for me, like, coming out had ramifications for me, but even more so, it had ramifications for my brothers. And I think that's really important to be aware of. I think something else to be aware of is, like, you know, we paint this picture a little bit that LGBTQ students have lower well-being because of bullying or conceptions or whatever. But there's also this whole just, like, you know, anxiety about, am I going to find someone? Am I, like, you know, my like, am I going to be able to build the Jewish home that is so idealized within these classrooms? You know, it's not all around, well, what is everyone else going to think about me? Like, there are other things that are going through, you know, an LGBT student's head. And I think it's important to recognize that.
So you're saying it's not just about the direct school-related experience and what's said within a school context, but a student in school is already thinking about the future and trying to imagine where they fit into this whole system which they're being taught about and educated about at school.
Yeah, exactly.
And I remember it must have been the day after you graduated, where you came to my office at Mizrahi to come out. Obviously, I'm not one of your friends, because you said that you told all of your friends by then. So you came to me as someone else.
Sorry, you didn't get in the car.
It's all right. It's all right. But that was an incredibly courageous thing to do, to come to the office of the rabbi of Mizrahi when you're not even a Mizrahi member in order to come out. What were you looking for in that conversation?
Right. Well, yeah, I think firstly, it's important to note, like, I had been in your year 12 Gemara class that for that year.
A leading student, a real star of the class.
You know, which made, you know, yes, you were the rabbi of Mizrahi, but also you viewed you as my rabbi and someone that I really trusted. And I knew that when I was coming out, I didn't want to say, okay, well, Eitan's going to be gay now, and that's going to be totally separate from his Jewish identity, and we're just going to have those two identities. You know, to me, it was really important to come out and do that in a very Jewish way and understand it from a very Jewish perspective. So that's why, like, you know, I said I came out at graduation, and, you know, the next day I was at your office. And so it was really important to me to go on that journey, not with the blessing of the rabbi, but with the guidance almost of a rabbi. And, you know, I'm really grateful for the conversation that we had then, mainly because, you know, you tick that box excellently of acceptance. Because I think really, you know, students who are LGBT, really what they want to hear is you are still part of the Jewish community, and you're not out of this tent. Like, you know, you can still come to shul, you can still daven at shul. Like, that's not the concern. And I think I almost knew that, but hearing that from you definitely took a weight off my shoulders. And then, beyond that, I was definitely looking for, me as a student who I still take my Judaism very seriously. I want to explore this within the realms of Judaism, within the realms of halacha and hashkafa.
And when you talk about halacha, which I found really interesting, because it also describes where you're coming from, which is you desperately want to live within the halachic system, and you're so proud of your Jewish identity, and you're not coming to break down barriers or with an agenda or to challenge. You simply want to be, and you're looking for the path within Torah to be yourself in the best way that you can. And so I would like to ask you, what advice do you have for the young Eitan Meyerowitzes in our school at the moment? People who love Torah and love our school and have questions about their sexuality and aren't quite sure how to put it all together.
Yeah. Hello, Eitan. I think really what I found most of all, beyond, there is that halachic understanding that I need, and me at 22, I'm sure the teachers are like, he's so young, but for students that's old. I'm still looking for answers, but to me, I have an innate understanding that God does not hate people who are LGBT, and like, if anyone tells you that, or if you have any inclination that God might hate people who are LGBT, I think I really think you're wrong. And I really don't believe that. I think secondly, what this whole thing has taught me is that it's okay to live in like this area of, I don't know, this area between, I know God doesn't hate me, but I know that there's this line in the Torah that kind of calls the act an abomination, and I know all these things, but I don't quite know how to pull it all together, but it's okay to kind of live in between those two realities, and becoming comfortable in an I don't know area, to me, is kind of has become emblematic of my relationship with Judaism. And finally, I think, and this is something that I say to people who come out to me a lot, especially to people who were younger than me when I was coming out, is that being gay or being LGBT does not define your identity. I think, it's very easy to jump on that bandwagon and be like, oh, I'm gay, amazing, I'm just going to be Eitan the gay person, right? But there is so much more to me, and so much more to every LGBT person beyond that small part that is sexuality or gender, right? And understanding yourself is much more important, and something to be much more proud of than, your sexuality or your gender. And I think that's something really important to know.
And I think that's a good point, because when I think of you, you're not Eitan the homosexual. That is part of your identity. But in addition, you are Eitan from Hineni, and Eitan who I taught in Yavneh, and Eitan from the musicals, and Eitan who went on your Shnat program, and Eitan the student. And there's the whole world of Eitan, of which this is part of your identity, but not your entire identity. And you don't necessarily have to feel that when people look at you, that's the first thing that they're thinking of, or the first thing they're aware of, because there's so much more to who you are.
Exactly. And so many things that are so much more important.
Yeah. Now, let me share with you something that's been on my mind as we've been putting this document together, especially as we've reached the final stages. At the moment, with my year 11 Gemara class, we've just started the 8th chapter of Bava Kama. Now, when I taught you Bava Kama, we didn't get up to the 8th chapter, but we've developed the VCE Gemara program since then. And now in term 4, we're able to get that far, okay? So the chapter starts off, it's called Perek HaChovel, and it deals with the payments for damages which you pay when you cause damage to another human being. I studied this. I remember the first time I learned this in school. And I remember the student who I learned this together with because he made some stupid song up for part of the Mishnah dealing with medical fees. And it's just a silly thing to remember. But this was my one of my high school chavrutot, and we were very friendly in high school, but we drifted after high school. I moved to Israel. He stayed in England. We went on different Israel programs. It was probably a year after high school, a bit later than that, where he came out as gay. And he had some very difficult years since then. He lost a family member at a critical point in his life, and he suffered from terrible drug abuse and addictions and other emotional issues as well. And last year, he died from an overdose. Now, every time I teach this Gemara, I think of my high school chavruta who I studied this Gemara together with. And on the one hand, there clearly is a relationship between his sexuality and his sense or lack of sense of belonging in the community. And I think there's no doubt that had he been able to feel more at home in the Jewish community, then perhaps his life may have taken a different direction. At the same time, he also had the grief issues and emotional well-being issues, and there were other factors as well. So I suppose what I'm describing is an extra layer of complexity in what is already a very complex area, where on the one hand, I'm incredibly cognizant of the emotional well-being factors involved when we're dealing with our LGBTI plus students. And it's something which I think we have to be cognizant of. But at the same time, I don't want to launch this policy in that spirit, because I don't want a student to think that if they're having certain feelings, then automatically they put themselves in that box, or to feel that we're treating this as a mental health issue, or to send a negative message around it. So I'm not quite sure where I'm going with this, but it's a certain area where I'm not quite sure how best to address it, because we have to be aware of the real dangers involved, where students don't have a sense of belonging in the community and they can't imagine their future in the community. But at the same time, we don't want to send negative messages around it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think it's a hard intersection, because, you know, the data shows that people, you know, LGBT people have more rates of mental health issues. That's just a fact. And that doesn't come from nowhere, you know, like mental health issues aren't just born out of nowhere. There's a reason, and it's because of resounding stigma and resounding feelings that, you know, LGBT people are bad, and therefore that makes their experiences bad, which makes them prone to developing mental health issues. However, as related as they are, I think it's really important to treat them separately, to understand that, exactly as you said, people who are LGBT are not immediately to be flagged as a mental health, you know, people with mental health issues. And, you know, even backwards, you know, I've been involved in narratives where people have felt, oh, as you know, I'm depressed because I'm gay, and as soon as I come out, I'll stop being depressed, right? And that doesn't happen. That doesn't exist. Like your sexuality and how comfortable you are within that is not going to solve your mental health issues. And you know, I think it's important to understand their relationship, but also important to treat them separately. And, you know, I'm sure the school has great ways to deal with mental health issues that, you know, that should be put in place if that's flagged for a student. But if a student is, you know, LGBT and struggling with it, but not to the extent that they're having a mental health issue, you don't have to confuse the two things.
Yeah, because depression is depression, and it needs to be treated as depression. And this is something you've taught me in the past as well, that when you deal with one side of the equation, it's not necessarily going to make the depression disappear, or it still has to be treated as depression. And we have to treat them as two separate issues while still being very aware statistically of the correlation between them, which is a real correlation.
Yeah.
Well, Eitan, I want to thank you for joining me in this conversation. And this is not our first conversation. It's our first public conversation. It's the first time other people are allowed to listen to us talking. And the spirit of our conversations is that it's good to talk. And I think that's what I want the message to be to our student body, that they should feel that they can turn to somebody who they trust, that they can speak to whether it's through their convener or the school psychologist or one of the rabbis in school or through their parents, that people will listen to them and they can have these conversations. And we do not have all the answers. And these are not easy or simple areas to discuss, but we can definitely have the conversation and we can definitely explore the issues together. And I want to thank you for doing so. Your name is Eitan. Eitan means strong and courageous. And we've just concluded the month of Tishrei, which is also known as Yerach HaEitanim, the month of the mighty ones, the month of the Eitans. And do you know whose name was Eitan? I must have taught this to you.
You have told me Abraham.
Abraham. Do you know who else was called Eitan?
Oh, no.
Yitzchak and Yaakov. All three of our forefathers had the same nickname from God, from Hashem. He called them all Eitan. And what a nickname is that it's a sign of liking someone, a sign of being beloved. You give a nickname to someone who you love. So what I want you to remember is that your name is a nickname for being beloved by Hashem. And just to always remember that you are loved by Hashem. And thank you for joining me today. And Be'ezrat Hashem, I know you didn't do this for the attention. Neither of us are looking for attention or to draw any extra attention to ourselves. But if there are other young Eitan Meyerowitzes in our school, and it's not if, there are, hopefully they similarly can feel that they too are beloved from Hashem the way that you are, in the same way that every single human being is.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. I really appreciate being part of this conversation. And, I'm so happy to be part of this conversation in the future as well. So I really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you very much.